The world was stunned when Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was pronounced dead on August 16, 1977. Crowds gathered outside Graceland, fans sobbed in the streets, and newspapers around the globe carried headlines that seemed almost impossible to believe. But as the shock of his sudden passing spread, whispers began to circulate. Something about Elvis's death didn't add up, and the events that unfolded in the days that followed only deepened the mystery. His funeral drew thousands, yet those who looked upon him in the casket came away unsettled, claiming he didn't look quite right. His skin seemed waxy, his features unfamiliar, his body strangely preserved. Then came the most chilling revelation of all: reports that the casket had been reopened in secret, and that what was discovered inside left even family members speechless. Was it really Elvis Presley who lay beneath the satin lining? Or had the king's final performance been a carefully constructed illusion? On the morning of August 16, 1977, the walls of Graceland echoed with a silence that felt unnatural. Elvis Presley, once the unstoppable force of American music, had been discovered lifeless on the bathroom floor of his Memphis mansion. His fiancée, Ginger Alden, was the one who found him. A moment so surreal it would haunt her forever. Paramedics were rushed to the scene, their sirens cutting through the humid Tennessee air, but there was little they could do. The king was gone, declared dead at just 42 years old. Within hours, the news spread across the globe, halting television programming and filling radio waves with nothing but Elvis songs. Fans outside Graceland fainted from shock, while others cried openly, unable to process the truth. Yet even as the world mourned, questions began to swirl. Witnesses whispered that the timeline of events didn't seem to match, that Elvis had been seen earlier that morning in better condition, and that something about the rush to remove his body felt suspicious. The official cause of death, a heart attack, was quickly announced, but medical reports hinted at drug involvement, sparking rumors of cover-ups. The embalming process was ordered almost immediately, adding fuel to speculation that certain truths were being hidden. Family members tried to maintain composure, but whispers inside Graceland told of arguments and confusion, as if no one could agree on how to handle the death of the world's most famous entertainer. By the time the body was prepared for the public viewing, many felt that the Presley family and authorities were less concerned with honesty than with preserving an image, and fans began to wonder whether the king's death had been as straightforward as the headlines claimed. Graceland became a fortress of grief in the days after Elvis Presley's death, its gates surrounded by thousands of fans desperate for a final glimpse of the man who had defined a generation. Vernon Presley, heartbroken and visibly aged overnight, made the decision to allow an open casket viewing inside the mansion, giving fans and close friends one last chance to say goodbye. On August 17th, the casket was placed in the foyer beneath the stained glass archways, guarded heavily by security, and slowly the mourners filed in. What they saw, however, stirred an unease that would never fade. Elvis's body lay dressed in a white suit, his hair neatly combed, his hands folded gently on his chest, but his appearance was strikingly off. Many described his skin as waxy and plastic, too smooth for a man who had been fighting years of health issues. Others pointed out that his nose seemed slimmer, his jawline too sharp, his face unnaturally youthful. The hands, which fans knew so well from countless concerts, looked swollen and oddly stiff. Whispers filled the room, some even suggesting that the figure inside the casket resembled a wax dummy more than the flesh and blood man who had electrified the world from stages in Vegas and stadiums across the globe. Outside, the media swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones shoved toward anyone willing to share an impression. And though many expressed sorrow, there were countless who confessed quietly that they didn't believe they were looking at Elvis at all. The funeral itself, held the following day, was a spectacle of sorrow. A procession carried the casket through Memphis streets, with mourners stretching for miles, weeping, singing, and throwing flowers onto the hearse. But even in this public display of grief, the unease persisted. Why had Elvis's body been presented in such a strange state? Why did so many insist he looked too perfect, almost staged, as though the king's final appearance had been carefully constructed to hide something deeper? By the time the casket was lowered into the ground at Forest Hill Cemetery, the seeds of doubt had been firmly planted, and for many, this funeral was not an ending, but the beginning of one of music's greatest mysteries. In the days that followed Elvis Presley's funeral, a story began to circulate that deepened the mystery surrounding the king's final moments. According to whispers within Memphis, the casket had not remained sealed after the funeral, but had instead been reopened in private under circumstances that were never fully explained. Some claimed it was necessary to adjust the embalming. Others insisted Vernon Presley ordered it to ensure his son was truly at rest. And a few suggested something far stranger, that there were doubts about who or what had actually been placed in that satin-lined box. Witnesses spoke quietly of unusual activity at Graceland late at night, when funeral staff and Presley family members gathered around the casket once more. What they allegedly found inside left them shaken. While official accounts would never confirm it, insiders described subtle but undeniable differences in the body's appearance. Some said the skin tone had shifted dramatically, appearing more artificial than ever, as though the embalming process had been tampered with or covered up. Others swore that the body seemed to have changed altogether, fueling theories that it wasn't Elvis lying there at all. Reports of Vernon Presley's behavior only added to the tension, his mood swinging wildly between grief and agitation, his insistence on strict secrecy, leading many to believe he was hiding something more than sorrow. Family members who were present at the second viewing rarely spoke publicly, but when pressed in interviews years later, their words often contradicted one another. Some flatly denied that the casket had ever been disturbed, while others hinted vaguely at necessary adjustments that were made. What could have required such adjustments after the world had already been given their final look at the king? For many, the act of reopening the casket was a moment of chilling significance, an indication that not everything about Elvis's death or burial was as straightforward as the public was led to believe. In fact, it was this act, the quiet, secretive reopening of the casket, that would become the foundation of decades of conspiracy theories, leading fans to believe that the king's story didn't end with the closing of those Graceland gates, but with something far more unsettling hidden inside the coffin itself. Of all the theories that emerged after Elvis Presley's death, none has been more persistent or more disturbing than the belief that the body displayed in the casket was not Elvis at all, but a carefully crafted wax dummy. This theory began almost immediately after the public viewing, when fans who had seen the king countless times up close insisted that the figure lying in the coffin simply didn't look like him. Observers noted a strange bead of sweat on the forehead, something that should have been impossible on a body that had been embalmed. Others swore that the skin appeared too smooth, too polished, like sculpted wax rather than human flesh. The nose appeared thinner, the eyebrows less natural, the hands bloated and oddly shaped, as if molded rather than organic. Some even claimed that the body seemed too slim compared to the Elvis, who, in his final years, had been noticeably heavier. These discrepancies gave birth to the chilling suggestion that the Presley family desperate to shield the world from the king's deteriorating condition, had used a wax replica to stand in for his corpse. The theory gained further traction when morticians who had supposedly worked on Elvis's body provided conflicting statements. Some said embalming had been rushed due to the heat, while others denied even seeing the process carried out. The lack of clarity created fertile ground for speculation, and then came the most bizarre claim of all, that the dummy had been placed in the casket because Elvis himself was not dead, but alive and preparing to disappear from public life forever. The so-called Elvis is alive movement found its foundation here, in the idea that what fans had mourned at Graceland was not the real king, but a decoy meant to fool the public. Skeptics dismissed the theory as tabloid fodder, yet the photographs, testimonies, and eerie details from those who stood inches from the casket gave it strength. Decades later, people still debate whether the figure in white was Elvis Presley or nothing more than wax and makeup. For believers, the wax dummy theory is not just speculation, it is proof that what lay inside the casket was never meant to tell the truth, but to protect a secret the world was not ready to face. If the casket itself left fans uneasy, the official documents surrounding Elvis Presley's death only made matters worse. The autopsy, conducted shortly after his body was taken from Graceland, was supposed to provide clarity. But instead, it created more questions than answers. Initially, the Shelby County Medical Examiner announced that Elvis had died of a heart attack, a sudden cardiac arrhythmia. But as weeks turned into months, the story began to unravel. Toxicology reports revealed an alarming number of prescription drugs in his system: painkillers, barbiturates, and sedatives, some in dangerously high levels. Yet instead of publishing the complete findings, officials sealed critical portions of the autopsy for 50 years, a decision that stunned both the public and medical experts. Pages were missing, details were redacted, and even the doctors who had been involved contradicted one another in interviews. Some described an enlarged heart, others emphasized liver damage, while still others suggested that the drug levels alone should have been listed as the cause of death. Why so many conflicting accounts? Why was so much information hidden? For conspiracy theorists, the missing pages became a smoking gun, proof that authorities were hiding something monumental. Was it to protect the Presley legacy from the embarrassment of drug abuse? Or was it, as some suspected, because the autopsy would have revealed that the body examined was not Elvis Presley at all? When reporters pressed Vernon Presley about the decision to seal the files, his answers were evasive, fueling speculation that he had agreed to keep certain truths buried with his son. The FBI and DEA were rumored to have had interests in the case, given Elvis's connections to prescription drug abuse and his honorary federal badge. Did government involvement play a role in ensuring the real details never saw daylight? For decades, the unanswered questions have lingered like a dark shadow over the king's passing. Every missing page and every contradictory statement has reinforced the suspicion that what lay in the casket and what was reported on the autopsy table may not have matched at all. And until those sealed documents are finally opened, the mystery of what the medical examiners truly found will remain one of the most haunting aspects of Elvis Presley's death. Beyond the official files and the family's guarded silence, it was the voices of those who stood closest to Elvis Presley's casket that carried the greatest weight. Over the years, morticians, funeral staff, security guards, and even close friends spoke in hushed tones about what they saw, and their testimonies did not always align with the story the public was told. Several funeral home employees reportedly remarked that the body did not resemble the Elvis they remembered. One recalled bluntly, "That wasn't the king I worked for." describing how the features seemed stiff, artificial, and unnaturally youthful for a man who had been bloated and worn down by years of poor health. Another claimed that the sideburns looked glued on, like those of a mannequin rather than real hair. Fans who attended the public viewing echoed these sentiments. They lined up for hours under the blazing Memphis sun, filing past the open casket for only a few seconds each. Yet, many left whispering to one another that something wasn't right. Some described the face as too perfect. Others noted the hands looked oddly swollen, and still others swore the body appeared slimmer than Elvis had been just days before. Ginger Alden, the woman who had found him, gave interviews where her descriptions of that final viewing seemed hesitant and strangely detached, as if she too sensed a difference she couldn't quite explain. Even members of Elvis's inner circle, the so-called Memphis Mafia, hinted at inconsistencies. Joe Esposito, his longtime road manager, was pressed on whether the body in the casket looked authentic, and though he maintained loyalty, his vague answers only stoked suspicion. The most chilling account came from a security guard assigned to Graceland during the funeral, who later claimed that the body had been replaced altogether before the public viewing. According to his story, only family members saw the true remains, while the masses were shown something else entirely. Such testimonies, scattered across decades of interviews, books, and documentaries, have kept the fire of speculation alive. When pieced together, they paint a haunting picture that the figure mourned by thousands may not have been Elvis Presley at all, but a carefully crafted image designed to close the chapter on his life while concealing the truth of what really happened. If the public's doubts could be dismissed as grief-stricken imagination, the behavior of Elvis Presley's own family made the mystery even harder to ignore. Vernon Presley, devastated by the sudden loss of his only son, was said to have grown unusually protective of the casket. He ordered heavy security around it, forbidding unauthorized access, and his instructions were carried out with such intensity that many began to suspect there was more at stake than mourning. Vernon gave interviews in the days after the funeral, but his statements often seemed contradictory. At one moment, he insisted that Elvis's body had been carefully prepared and looked at peace, but at another, he hinted that adjustments had to be made because things didn't look right. Those words, vague and heavy with implication, fueled the belief that the body seen by the public was not the same one Vernon had seen privately. Priscilla Presley, meanwhile, remained mostly silent. When pressed by reporters, she offered condolences and memories, but avoided direct questions about the viewing, as though speaking about it was off-limits. Even years later, when she opened up in interviews and books about her marriage, her time at Graceland, and Elvis's struggles, she consistently dodged details about the casket and the funeral. Lisa Marie Presley, only 9 years old at the time, was too young to fully understand. But as she grew older, her statements about her father's death shifted in tone, sometimes sounding certain, other times hesitant, as though she too had been left with unresolved doubts. Members of the extended Presley family gave conflicting accounts as well. Some swore that the body was Elvis and that the family had no reason to deceive, while others, speaking in private decades later, admitted that even they were unsettled by what they saw. These contradictions, paired with the family's refusal to release the full autopsy and the decades-long sealing of records, created the impression of a carefully maintained secret. Why such silence? Was it to preserve Elvis's dignity in death, shielding him from the world's gaze after years of relentless scrutiny? Or was it because the truth about what lay in that casket was too explosive to be revealed? The Presley family's guarded words and evasive answers ensured that the mystery would not fade with time, but instead grow stronger, leaving fans to wonder if the king's final chapter had been rewritten by those closest to him. The story of Elvis Presley's casket did not end with the lowering of the coffin into the ground at Forest Hill Cemetery. In fact, for many, that moment was just the beginning. The rumors of the casket being reopened, the unsettling appearance of the body, the whispers of wax dummies and swapped remains, all of it became the foundation for one of the most enduring legacies in music history. To this day, fans debate not just how Elvis died, but whether he ever truly left at all. Sightings began almost immediately. Within months of his burial, reports surfaced of Elvis being spotted at airports, gas stations, and restaurants across America. A man resembling him was photographed buying a ticket to Argentina. Another was seen driving a limousine in Las Vegas, and still others swore they heard his voice on late-night phone calls. Each story tied back to the belief that the body in the casket had been a decoy, placed there to give the world closure while the king slipped quietly into hiding. Tabloids fueled the fire with headlines screaming "Elvis lives," and conspiracy groups emerged, dedicated to proving that the man mourned by millions had staged his death to escape fame, debt, and declining health. Skeptics dismissed these tales as fantasy, yet the inconsistencies in the official record kept the theories alive. The missing autopsy pages, the family's silence, the witnesses who insisted the body looked artificial, all combined to create a puzzle with missing pieces. A puzzle that fans have tried to complete for nearly 50 years. But beyond the sensational claims of Elvis still breathing somewhere in secret, the casket mystery left a deeper, more haunting impact. Doubt. Doubt in official stories. Doubt in authority. Doubt in the very idea that death always brings truth. For those who stood outside Graceland in August of 1977, the grief was real, the loss was unbearable, but so too was the nagging sense that something had been concealed. That sense has not faded with time. Even today, documentaries, books, and endless online discussions revisit the strange details of Elvis's funeral, treating the casket not as a symbol of closure, but as a door that never fully shut. Was the body a poorly embalmed version of a man broken by fame and prescription drugs? Or was it a wax figure meant to hide a darker secret? Was Vernon Presley guarding his son's dignity? Or was he protecting a truth that would have shaken the world? These questions have no easy answers, and perhaps they never will. But the fact that they persist speaks to the power of Elvis Presley's legend. His music may have stopped on that August day, but the mystery of his casket ensured that his story would never truly end. It haunts fans because it refuses to be solved, because it keeps the king alive in a different way, not just as a voice on the radio or a memory on film, but as a myth that continues to challenge what we believe about life, death, and the price of fame. And so, nearly half a century later, the final question remains unanswered, hanging in the air like one of Elvis's unfinished notes. When they opened the casket of Elvis Presley, did they bury the king of rock and roll? Or did they bury the truth along with him?